joined by Tina Winchester, who we'll pass you over to shortly. Tina is going to take us through a presentation regarding mental health. But before I do that, I will share with you some market insights. So we actually originally had a market update event scheduled for April the 23rd to take place here in Brisbane in the city. Encouragingly, we're all set to have over 180 people attend the event, but of course, Friday the 13th of March happened, and we find ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic and crisis, and obviously a very different market to what anyone would have expected at the start of the year. Now, to be very clear with everyone in what we've seen, I'm sure this will come as no surprise, we saw a dramatic reduction in the number of vacancies we're working on during the course of April. We operate across a number of disciplines and have a relatively diverse client base, but almost everyone was affected. In fact, I read this morning in the Courier Mail, I think it's 1 in 5 Australians have either lost their job or had their hours cut. So it's definitely been widespread. Some more so than others. So there are some pockets of activity, particularly mining, logistics, supply chain, where they've been relatively or comparatively stable, I should say, in Queensland. But overall, it's been a very, very tough period for everyone. And I don't expect we'll see a big rebound anytime soon. But I am very encouraged to see a slight increase in the last few weeks in the number of positions becoming available, both on Seek, but also in the number of jobs we're taking. So I hope we're through the worst of it. And I think as employers start to transition workforces back into the offices, we'll start to see things increase a little bit more. I don't think it will be as big as some people are talking about, as once everyone gets back, suddenly everyone will start hiring. I doubt that's going to be the first thing people are going to be doing. I think there'll still be an air of trepidation out there where people are just going to sort of hold before they start committing to moving forward. So some of the key trends we've seen, I'd mentioned, would be it's been very fluid. And what I mean by that is that for the job seekers out there, it would be incredibly frustrating, even for the roles that you might have applied to or you've been contacted about a position that's happening. And we've definitely seen this where the job has then gone from being maybe a permanent role to a temporary role, and then gone from a temporary role to a fixed-term contract role to then being not a role at all, or the role's completely changed. So a lot of people have sort of been put through the ringer, I think, with it. And I just want to mention that as a job seeker, I appreciate that would be very annoying. But unfortunately, it has been the environment. And I think until we get a period of some form of stabilization, there will be that indecision and things changing. So if that's happened to yourself, it's not just you, it's definitely been widespread. Obviously, it's competitive with the number of applications. So we have seen a dramatic, on job boards, dramatic decrease in the number of ads. There are plenty of people that are looking, unfortunately. So that does mean it's more competitive. And to give you an example, we have a people and culture business partner. We've been running the ad for 3 weeks. We've had 104 applications to that role. Same role, same period last year, we had 28, so quite a significant increase in those applications. Another example would be in accounting. We had a senior accounts officer role. In a week, we've had 42 applications. Doing the same comparison, we had about 20. So again, quite a significant increase. So if you are out there looking and applying to a role at the moment, some of the advice I would give if you're going via the job boards, which a lot of people will be, is it is essential that your CV highlights what the role involves and very succinctly on that first page. And don't just rely on a cover letter. And I know some people might say, well, I put it in the cover letter. I don't want to have to put it. You have to have it in both. Because to be honest, not everybody reads cover letters. So you can't assume anything. And the way to approach it is to look at the job and see what's in there in the responsibilities, and look at your CV and look at the roles that you've had most recently in your responsibilities, and you've really got to highlight to make sure that it matches. So if it says, if you're a management accountant, it says month-end reporting analysis, then if you've had that experience, the first thing you want to see when you go into your experience is exactly that. And I want to see it on the first page, even if it's in a key skills summary, so that you can make that match. In particular with the selection criteria, if it says again, an accountant, if it's a qualified accountant, certain system, have that very abundantly clear on your CV. And I think a good test would be if you get somebody that doesn't know anything about the career that you have, or maybe the sector you work in, show them a job ad, show them your CV, and if they can't make the match, then you've probably got an issue there you need to work on, because to be honest, a computer will make that match to the keywords, and often the person who's looking at your application, you can't assume they have, if it was an accountant, will have a background in accounting and will know that certain things are transferable. They might just not have a clue, and they will be running through lots of applications, have a look for a couple of seconds, and the keywords really need to be there to say, yeah, okay, that makes sense, and then it will progress. So it's quite a bit of work, I know, to do that, and it means if you're applying to different types of roles with slightly different responsibilities, it does mean you'd have to have a number of versions of your CV, but that is definitely the way I would say to approach it. Also, start dates have been delayed. So another trend we've seen is that people have accepted positions, particularly in sales, mainly due to the ability to onboard staff. Majority of organisations have been able to do virtual onboarding, but there's still 36% are finding that new starters, they want them to come into the office. So we've got a few stats that I'll throw at you, because we conducted a survey at P2P over the course of April. Speaking to candidates and clients representing over 160,000 employees. So we were able to ask a number of questions around this, around what the people were thinking and what they're finding in the market, and I'll run through some stats as we're talking through this. The other thing to mention is candidates who are employed are very hesitant to make a move. So with the survey, we asked candidates about their thoughts on now we're in the pandemic, about looking for a job, and 38% of the candidates in the survey have paused or are very reluctant to take on a new role. So whether or not that trend will continue as we do, hopefully move forward and get a little bit of stability, will be interesting to see, because maybe that will result in a candidate shortage. I think another thing to mention will be that when candidates are looking for a role, you'll find stability is obviously going to come up on that list, because wow, I think everyone's been very shocked and caught out by this, and will now be thinking about, when we're joining an employer, will they be stable? Because it's been a horrific experience, I know, for a lot of people. The other trend I'd mention, and this is a mega trend, as I would call it. So, and this has been the amount of people working from home and having flexibility. And actually, one of the trends I was going to talk about at the start of the year, when we had planned our original event, was about flexibility. And that's because we had a number of positions that were turned down, so job offers that were turned down because the candidates wanted a little bit of flexibility in their workplace, or the new workplace, and they'd asked for something as simple as 1 day a week from home, or once a fortnight, ability to log on. And some employers, unfortunately, said, no, we can't offer that. And it's company policy, and these are some big organisations as well as small ones, and it might be a big policy for the huge corporates, or a small business, the boss doesn't like it, that sort of thing. Obviously, fast forward a couple of months, and now everybody has been working from home. So I think that if there's anything good might have come out of the horror of this situation, is that it has literally forced and sort of challenged that perception that you can't offer flexibility to employers, because we've all had to do it. And even myself, I found it's worked actually really well. Not that I was dead against it before, but I've been surprised. And I hope a lot of organisation has been, and I hope that that's now going to open the doors for people that need that flexibility, that couldn't enter the workforce, that now can, or perhaps they're looking for a new role and they currently have flexibility, but it's actually quite hard when you're taking on a new job to get that up front. There's sort of this annoying perception that it's a trust thing, and you might hear a few people talk about, oh, I wonder what they're doing at home or so on, and you have to work somewhere first, whereas hopefully now that's gone out the window and we know it works and we can move forward with it. The other point to mention is working from home in some form of isolation. So we've all been doing that, and I think that some people could have been complete isolation, of course, because they've had to be, but we've certainly been more isolated than say we've ever been. And going back to the survey, we found that 64% of employees felt they were lacking engagement, motivation, and emotional support, which is quite a big number. 50% of employees also were concerned for their well-being, and they were worried about how they were going to cope with the stress of this situation, which is very, very concerning. Unfortunately, I'm joined, as I said, by Tina Winchester. Tina has over 25 years experience working mental health services in Australia and the UK. She's an accredited principal master mental health first aid instructor and co-creator of Australia's first workplace mental health induction program. So Tina, we look forward to hearing from you, and certainly I think it's a time when we need it more than ever. So I'm going to pass you over to Tina, who's going to run through her presentation. If we do have any questions, and I see a few of those popping up, we will have a short Q&A at the end of Tina's presentation where we can run through those. And over to you, Tina.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much. Is my sound okay? Let me just check that first. Perfect. Okay. And thank you for the opportunity to share some of this information with you all. It is a time when mental health awareness should be at the top of everybody's list, because nobody has been unaffected by what's been happening with COVID-19. So let's get started. So what we're going to have a look at in this short session around mental health awareness is mental health and how to look out for signs and symptoms of poor mental health, because often people misunderstand, is this normal stress or is this something that I maybe need to pay some more attention to? We're going to have a look at anxiety, and the reason why I wanted to focus on anxiety is because it is the most prevalent mental health condition in Australia, and that's not unusual for the Western world. But stress and anxiety is something that everybody is feeling in abundance at the moment. So I wanted to give you some information around that. And then also how to have a conversation with someone that we could be concerned is struggling with their mental health. We find that this is something that comes up all the time. I'm worried about someone, but I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I don't want to tip somebody over the edge if that's a thing. And I don't want to offend anybody. And then finally, we'll have a look at how to stay mentally well, because there are lots of things that we can do for ourselves to look after our mental health at all times. So my first poll question, Remy, is it okay if I ask you to put that first poll question to everybody?
Sure.
And the question is, what percentage of people do you think in Australia have mental health? So across the Australian population, what percentage do you think have mental health? And I'll give you a few minutes to answer that question. And then Remy, when you've got an answer in terms of the response, can you let me know so I can respond to that?
We're just going to give them a few seconds. All right. Just another 10 seconds and then we'll see. I'll tell you the results. Okay, so from what I can see now, 27% say that only 25% have mental health. 40% that say that 50% of the population have mental health, and then 20% say it's 75% of the population who have mental health, and finally only 13% say it's 100% of the population that have mental health.
Wonderful. So if you were in the group that said 100% of the Australian population have mental health, you're the winners, because that's the right answer. We all have mental health and we all have physical health. And the reason I wanted to put that question to you is because there is such a misunderstanding around what mental health is and what mental illness is. And the two are very, very different. So the percentage of the Australian population that have mental health is 100%. We all have physical health and we all have mental health. And let me explain in a little bit more detail about what I mean by that. So this is the mental health continuum. Most people believe that when it comes to mental health or mental illness, we're at one fixed point. We either have mental health or we don't. And that simply isn't true. We all actually sit on a mental health continuum. And we are forever moving along this continuum in terms of how we feel. Pretty much minute to minute, day to day, we could move along that mental health continuum. So when we're at the healthy functioning end of the mental health continuum, it doesn't mean that we are zen. It doesn't mean we don't have any problems. It doesn't mean we don't have any issues and we don't worry about anything. What that means is that when life throws difficulties our way, we can cope with those difficulties, and it doesn't impair on our ability to live our lives, to work, to study, to maintain relationships. We all will move up and down the mental health continuum from normal, healthy functioning to reacting continuously through a day. So this is our response to stress and anxiety, where it's not impairing our lives, it's not impairing our ability to function, but it is impacting us upon us in ways where it might impact the things that we think about, the way that we feel, and the way that we engage with other people, and the way that we deal with stress. So as we're moving along the continuum, it will impair the way that we deal with stress and have some impact in some way, but it's not irreversible. When we actually move further along the mental health continuum, if we have difficulties and stresses and situations in our lives that are not being resolved, then we have the concern that we're going to move into becoming injured in some way with our mental health, which means that the impact will be much more severe and much more persistent. And we will find that our ability to work and study and maintain relationships does become difficult, and it will impact quite significantly. If we don't reach out or engage with some kind of help, whatever that might look like, as we move from that reacting part of the continuum into injured, psychologically injured, then we can amplify the experience and move into having poor mental health or a mental illness. It doesn't mean that we can't get better and we won't get well. It just means that our journey is a little longer and maybe a little harder. What we want people to do with mental health awareness sessions, with mental health training sessions, with raising awareness, is to be able to intervene when people are at the reacting stage of the mental health continuum, so that we can support people so that they don't move into becoming injured or unwell, or into crisis where we find that people are losing their lives to suicide. So that's the mental health continuum. We all have it. We're all on it somewhere. Today, I think I'm in the green. Yesterday, I might have been maybe tipping over to the yellow. It was a particularly stressful day. And there's been times in my life, for example, when I've experienced grief and loss, when I know I've been in the injured end of the mental health continuum. But with the right kind of support and the right kind of treatment, we can all move back to healthy functioning. So mental health, it affects our emotional, psychological and social well-being, and it affects the way that we think, feel and act. And these three things are really intrinsically linked. So we know that the things that we think about affects the way that we feel, and then the way that we act. And when our thoughts are impaired due to stress, difficulties, it can then determine how we're going to handle other stressors in our lives. It will impact on our relationships, no doubt, and it actually impacts on our ability to make good choices. There are parts of the brain that get impaired, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the anxiety part. So mental illness. Mental illnesses are real medical conditions. You can't will them on and you can't will them away. They are real medical conditions. There is no conspiracy theory around mental illness. They are real, and they impact a lot of people. And it impacts on the way that we think, feel and behave, and it can be very disrupting to our ability to work, study and maintain relationships. But the majority of people that have a mental illness at some point in their life will recover and not have another mental illness again, or another episode of mental illness again. For example, with depression, it's about 50-50. It's only a small minority of people that go on to experience mental illness significantly and have frequent episodes through their lives. What mental illness isn't, it is not a sign of weakness. It is not somebody that has a weak resolve in some way or isn't resilient. It isn't about being a negative person or feeling a little bit sad or crying all the time. And it has got nothing to do with socks. You cannot pull your socks up and become better from a mental illness. What I want people to understand is that we should be viewing mental illness in the same way that we view physical illness. There should be parity. We don't tell people that have asthma, chronic asthma, to breathe deeper, but we tell people with mental illness that they should maybe pull their socks up and harden up a little bit. Okay, next poll question, Remy, if I may. So employers should support the mental health of its employees. If you could put that to everybody and let me know the outcome of that poll question, that'd be fab.
Sure, I've just published it, so I'm waiting for the figures now. Just waiting for a bit more. If you want to vote, guys, the way you do it, if you just look at the right sidebar and you click on polls at the top, and then you will see the polls and you can just vote for it. But so far, right now, it's not really, like, you basically have 100% who say it's true and 0% who say it's false.
Okay.
So
is it
employers should support the mental health of their employees? 100% true.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take it. And look, there isn't a right or wrong answer really for this in terms of an individual viewpoint. But I want to give you a little bit of information to get you thinking about that question as to whether it's an employer's responsibility to support the mental health of its employees. So from a moral perspective, we should, when it comes to health and safety of our employees, when it comes to looking after well-being, of course, we should be ensuring that our mental health is taken into account as well. But there is a financial element that I wanted to share with you, which people tend to find quite interesting. So this is from the PricewaterhouseCoopers report back in 2014, but it's still relevant. And PricewaterhouseCoopers found that untreated mental health conditions cost the Australian workplace around $10.9 billion a year. Now, this is back in 2014. There's been some other reports since that suggest it's actually looking more like to be $12 billion a year. This is what it's costing workplaces. And that figure comprises of absenteeism, presenteeism and compensation claims. Now, when it comes to absenteeism, $4.7 billion in absenteeism in relation to mental health. And we know from this report that one individual employee with untreated depression will have, on average, an additional 3 to 4 sick days a month. That's a lot. Presenteeism, very difficult to gauge, but presenteeism is when people will turn up to their jobs and not be able to be productive because they are struggling in some way with their health. And then the compensation claims, 146 million in compensation claims. Mental health compensation claims are 3 times more costly than physical health compensation claims in Australia. If there was ever a reason why employers should be thinking about looking after the mental health of their staff, we always go to the dollar figures to show them why they should be doing that. And this report also showed that for every dollar an employer invests in the mental health of its staff, the return on investment, according to PwC, is about $2.30. And that grows depending on how big your business is. So there's a moral cost, there's a human cost to save lives and to save misery. And there is also an economic cost. So indicators of poor mental health. Everybody is different, but we do know that there are some common factors that we tend to feel when our mental health is poor. And that means when we are moving along the mental health continuum from healthy coping towards becoming unwell. So a persistent feeling of sadness that doesn't leave us is very common, as are feelings of anxiousness and worrying persistently. And we're going to look at that in a bit more detail. Feeling emotional, being irritable and angry is very common. And at the moment with COVID-19, we're finding that people are reporting their irritability levels are through the roof. Sleep difficulties are always top of the list. So difficulty getting to sleep, staying asleep, and early morning waking. And often it's the first indicator for us that we're not traveling so well with our mental health. And then we often notice that people have changes in their appetite. So we can see people will have quite drastic weight loss or weight gain. Fatigue is always top of the list as well, and often people will see their GP reporting feeling tired all the time. And then feelings of worthlessness and feelings of guilt for no reason at all. These are symptoms of poor mental health. These are not symptoms of reveling in pity. These can be symptoms that somebody is not doing so well at all with their mental health. So anxiety, the most prevalent mental health condition in Australia. And the thing with anxiety is that often people don't understand there is a difference between anxiety and anxiety disorders. And anxiety is an experience that we all have, and anxiety disorders is a mental health condition. Everybody experiences anxiety, and anxiety is generated from a little part of our brain called the amygdala. It's a very important part of our brain because it fires up our fight, flight, freeze response. So it will tell us that we're in danger, which was good when we were in danger and we were fighting lions and needing to kill lions to feed the family. It would fire up when faced with a lion and either compel us to take the lion on and eat for a week, or run away from the lion, or freeze and hope that the lion doesn't see us as a threat. The thing with the amygdala, though, is we've evolved as human beings, but the amygdala hasn't. The amygdala responds in exactly the same way now as if we were faced with a life-threatening situation. But these days, the amygdala will fire up in response to things like fear of public humiliation, fear of losing our job, fear of being ridiculed, fear of being placed in a situation that we don't feel comfortable, fear of taking financial risks, fear of taking risks around our careers and our jobs, fear of starting a new job. It will fire up in those kind of situations, which is perfectly normal. And then the stress response will reduce once the stressor is removed. And anxiety will affect our thinking, so that our thoughts, it will affect the way that we feel, and then our behaviour. And also it affects us physically. And so the way that anxiety will manifest, and all of us can relate to this, and if you do come across anybody that says, I never get anxious, I never get nervous, don't work for them, don't date them. It's not a good trait. So we all have anxiety, and our symptoms might be physical symptoms, so tension in the shoulders, gastrointestinal difficulties, headaches, nausea, general aches and pains. And that's because the stress response fires up and then starts to shut down different physical aspects of our body. So it will stop digesting food. It will start to pump our hearts very quickly and try and move more oxygen around, because we tend to lose our breath. And psychological symptoms. So it will start to fire up our rumination and overthinking. So the amygdala will start to tell us things like, we're not going to cope, and this is going to be terrible, and I'm never going to be the same again, and nobody's ever going to view me the same again, and my reputation is tarnished, and I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my health. And it starts to create these really catastrophic scenarios. And then behavioural symptoms, we tend to move away from things that make us feel anxious. So we might start adopting avoiding behaviours. We might even start to have some kind of ritualistic behaviour that will come in a way that we try and manage our environment. So we might become hypervigilant in some way. We might start to also behave quite out of character, being very irritable and snappy, or angry, or difficult. We don't present very well or experiencing anxiety. Now, anxiety disorders, this is different from that normal everyday anxiety that everybody experiences, and they're much more intense and long lasting. And it is often people will have more than one type of anxiety disorder, so it can be quite cruel. Anxiety disorders are very, very treatable, though. I really do want to stress that. Even though we have a high percentage in Australia of people with anxiety disorders, it is actually one of the easier disorders to treat. And anxiety disorders can differ from person to person depending on the things that they feel anxious about or the beliefs that they have. And I want to stress, when it comes to anxiety, Often people will want to know what their triggers are and say, I must avoid doing these things because they're my triggers. And it's not actually situations that we respond to or people that we respond to. It's the things we tell ourselves about the situations. The amygdala is really good at lying to us. And the amygdala will tell us things that's not true. And most people believe every thought that goes through their mind, and thoughts aren't facts. So, final poll question. Recovery from anxiety disorders requires facing situations that are anxiety provoking. I'll leave that one with Remy.
The poll, here we go. So you should be able to publish it. So if you go to the right sidebar, you can then vote for the third poll. Here we go. So now we're just gonna give them a few seconds. Just waiting a bit more. It's very close, the results. Okay, now it seems that true is stronger than false. False was stronger at the beginning. Okay, so recovery from anxiety disorders require facing situations that are anxiety provoking. It's pretty much 60-40. So 60% true, 40% false. Excellent.
It is true. Recovery from anxiety disorders does require us to face situations that are anxiety provoking. If somebody does have an anxiety disorder and they are looking for the right kind of treatment and support to face the situations that are anxiety provoking, it must be with a qualified medical professional that can help do that in the most gentle and effective way. But the reason I put this question out is because often people will do anything not to feel anxious. And actually, that's the worst thing that we can do. It's really important that we do push ourselves through situations that are anxiety provoking and face those situations, because that is what builds our resilience. And when it comes to raising families, often parents will do whatever they can to shield their children from feeling anxiety. Go and tell the teacher, don't let little Johnny do the presentation because he's really anxious about it. Well, I would say tell little Johnny he needs to do the presentation, because we only learn that we can cope with anxiety when we face anxiety. Other treatments, though, when it comes to anxiety disorders, cognitive behaviour therapy is the best treatment for anxiety disorders, because it gets us to analyse our thoughts, feelings and behaviours. And for people that are experiencing quite chronic anxiety, there are really good medications out there that a GP can prescribe. So our everyday anxiety, our COVID-19 anxiety, how do we manage it? The first thing I want you to think about doing is to check your thinking. We are the only species on the planet that can think about our thinking. We often don't do that, though. So pay attention to the things that you're telling yourself. Pay attention to whether your thoughts are actually bullying you. So you're telling yourself you're not going to cope. This is terrible. This is never going to get better. And remember that breath plays a huge role in determining moving up and down the anxiety scale. So it's important that you remember to breathe. Distracting is really good at managing anxiety, because if we allow ourselves to ruminate and overthink for long periods of time, it will affect us physiologically. So it will affect us physically and leave us feeling really quite unwell. And check the evidence. What I mean by that is when you're checking your thinking, you need to check your evidence. Are you finding yourself doing things like mind reading? Are you looking at someone that you are having difficulties with and telling yourself, I know what they think X, Y, and Z. And there is no evidence behind that other than your amygdala making up stories. So check the evidence that what it is that you're thinking and telling yourself is actually true. And then gain perspective. When we get caught up in our own heads and we're only listening to our anxious thoughts, we get quite tunnel visioned. And also when the anxiety response fires up, it doesn't only shut down those physical parts of our body like our digestion, it actually starts to impair other areas of the brain. So our ability to reason and problem solve will be impaired because we are hyper focused on saving our lives and surviving. So gain perspective, and you can do that by talking to somebody that you trust. Do limit your access to the news when it comes to COVID-19. I do feel as if we are coming out the other side, maybe in Australia or certain states in Australia, but do limit your access to the news, because the more we're bombarded with this negative sensational information, the more it's going to affect our anxiety response. And try and be more present. So when you find yourself feeling stressed and anxious, try to bring your focus from inside your head to outside your head. So be present and focus then on the things that you can see, the things that you can smell, taste and touch, and the things that you can hear. And that actually helps to ground us. And then exercise. We know from clinical studies that 30 minutes of exercise at a pace where you can speak but not sing at least 3 times a week is as effective as a mild antidepressant. And when your body is fired up with stress, it will start to pump adrenaline and your body will want to expel energy. So give it what it needs. Go for a run or a walk in my case, or lift some weights or whatever it is that you do as a form of exercise. And remember to keep making connections, even if they are virtually, and not just chat connections. Try and make connections where you can see somebody face to face. That way you can connect and read somebody's body language and they can read yours, and then you'll be on the same page. So how do I help someone if I'm concerned about their mental health? Now, the first thing that you're not going to do is go telling everybody at work that you're worried about someone. The best thing that you can do is be transparent and honest with the person that you're concerned about and have a conversation with them. So do find a private location that's going to be free from interruptions. These days, at the moment, it's good, no doubt it'll be virtually. But be honest about what it is that you're concerned about and what it is that you may have seen, heard or noticed about the person that you think might be struggling with their mental health. So share in a transparent way. I've noticed that you're not your usual self, or you seem quite down. How are you doing? Open up an opportunity without judgment for somebody to talk about what it is that's happening to them, and do reassure the person of confidentiality. If you can't be confidential, then you're not the right person to have the conversation. And let the person know that you care for them, and let them know that they are valued as an employee. We value your input here. We don't want you to be struggling. If there was anything at all that we could do to support you. And remember that nobody is expected to fix anybody else's problems. That's not what we're suggesting. But let them know that you're concerned and that you do want to help them in some way. Give the person time to talk. So you need to be quiet and listen. Don't try and force somebody to tell you what's going on, because sometimes we need to plant the seed so that they know that we are noticing that they're struggling, and that we want to support them, and they may go away and think about it, and then we might need to check in on them. And then give the person credible real information about the things that might help. Many people do seek the advice and support of their GP if they are having problems with their mental health. And we know that from the most recent study from the Royal College of GPs in Australia, psychological problems are the #1 reason that people go and see their GPs. And that's been the same for the past couple of years. So mental health issues beat gastrointestinal issues, back pain, any other issue. GPs are used to dealing with this. If they're not comfortable speaking to their GP, if they don't like their GP, then find a new GP. Or if they wanted to do something that was a little bit more self-help, then maybe share details of your employee assistance program or any websites or helplines that you have. And there is a resources list that we'll be sharing with you after the webinar. And let them know that you're there to help them if they want to have a chat, or if they want to find out some more information, and be there for them. What I don't want you to do is be dismissive. So saying to someone, man up, cheer up, she'll be right, is very dismissive. And actually it can set the tone as to whether somebody will ever talk to anybody else again about how they're feeling. So resist the temptation to say, I know how you feel. Even if you've had your own experience of mental health problems, everybody's experience is different. As soon as we start saying, I know how you feel, it invalidates the experience for the person. And don't pressure them to do something about it. Unless somebody is in crisis and their life is at risk, we can't force anybody to do anything. But don't ignore the signs. If you notice that somebody has persistently been behaving differently or displaying some of the signs that I've already talked about, take a deep breath and be the courageous one that has a chat with the person. But never ever take over and tell anybody what to do. Nobody has the right to do that. And then staying mentally well. So there are lots of things that we can do to stay mentally well. My recommendation number one is to prioritize your sleep. Your sleep will be impaired first when it comes to our mental health. And as we're moving along the mental health continuum, if we're under stress or under pressure. Sleep is not a waste of time. In fact, sleep is essential for us staying mentally well. Recommendations are between 7 and 9 hours of good quality sleep a night, and anyone that's got small children will be rolling their eyes at me now, but that's what we should be aiming for. Even if sleep is the only thing that you go and have a chat with your GP about, if you've been experiencing stress or anxiety, that's the one thing I would put at the top of your list. Check your thinking, as I've already mentioned. So what is it that you're telling yourself? If your thoughts are cruel and unkind to yourself, if the things that you tell yourself are things that you would never say to somebody that you love and somebody that you care for, stop saying it to yourself. So check your thinking. Diet is really important. We know from clinical studies over recent years that actually diet and mental health are really closely linked. So gut health and mental health. If we eat high processed foods, high carb diets, if we don't have much nutrition in our diets, it will impact on our ability to be able to create the feel-good hormones such as serotonin, for example. So about 80 to 90% of serotonin is generated in the gut. There's serotonin receptors in the gut. So watch what you eat. I'm not saying eat curly kale all the time. Nobody wants to do that. But just incorporate nutrition into your diet. Exercise, I've already talked about the benefits of exercise. And relationships are really important. So nurturing the relationships that are good for us, being around people that whose energy we find uplifting. And when we leave that person, they leave us feeling good about ourselves. They're the kinds of relationships we should be nurturing. We're not built to be on our own. And then self-care. Any kind of self-care is good self-care as long as it's legal, and if it involves another person, as long as it's consensual. So self-care, doing things that you enjoy, will raise your feel-good hormones and chemicals. You will generate more of those, so chemicals such as serotonin or oxytocin, those kind of chemicals that make us feel good about ourselves, and that will impact on our ability to manage stress. So self-care isn't selfish, it's actually really essential to staying mentally well. So you should be putting your own needs first on occasion. Okay, I think I'm doing very well for time. So resources, this is the final slide before we go to questions. The best first port of call if you are concerned about your own mental health or the mental health of somebody else is a general practitioner. They are well versed in dealing with mental health problems. They can't tell you what to do. They can give you options for treatment. As I've already said, if you don't have a good relationship with your GP, change GPs, because there are some really good ones out there. Do use your employee assistance programs. They are completely confidential. If they're available to you, they are not there for times of crisis. They're there to support people so that they don't get to crisis. Beyond Blue have some excellent resources on their website, particularly around coronavirus and mental well-being. So I would recommend you have a look at their website. And then you'll also have a link from us at the Career Development Centre with a list of COVID-19 mental health resources, and also a transcript and much more information about the topics that I've covered today. And then finally, if your organisation has mental health first aid officers, which I would recommend, at least one mental health first aid officer for every physical first aider, then they are a source of support for people. They are trained to work with people that are struggling with their mental health and make sure that they get the right kind of support and care in the workplace. Thank you very much. I really do hope that you found that helpful. I think Remy, we're moving to questions now. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you, because I can't see you right.
Then I'm going to bring back Ben on stage. Here we go. And up.
Thank you, Remy, and thank you very much, Tina. That was fantastic. It really was, and a lot of takeaways from there, and I can see that it's generated a lot of questions too, so the engagement's been very high. So we've got questions from earlier regarding the market, obviously, and also plenty regarding your presentation. So I'll start off, maybe we'll do sort of in rotation, and perhaps I've got a question here from Faye. That's actually for myself, and Faye has said, I've commenced postgraduate studies in data analytics. I was wondering if this will be a growth area of the future. I'd answer that, Faye, by saying absolutely. It definitely is a growth area of the future. In fact, it's been so, I'd say even going back for the last year or two, data has really come a big way along, and I think it's going to continue to do so. So anyone that's looking at taking any studies in that particular area, I'd strongly suggest it, no matter what level that you are at. And I think there's been, certainly at a CFO level, there's sort of a change around from you really need to be very data driven. So it's a skill set that's going to be required, and I would suggest anyone to upskill themselves in that area if they can. The question I have for Tina from Michelle. So for those people who don't feel supported by their employers or are scared that they will lose their job if they speak up about their mental health, what options are available to them?
What a good question. Well, first of all, it's illegal to discriminate against somebody who has a mental illness in the workplace. And I wish my response would be, you know, we need to start a revolution, but we can't because it does affect jobs. So if you are concerned about the response that you're going to get from a manager in the workplace, I would be looking to use your employee assistance program initially, because they will have an understanding of the organisation that you work for, and whether they have a fair and reasonable approach to mental illness. Does that help?
I think that certainly would answer it. One of the things I did have another question for yourself was, you mentioned about a first aid course and having somebody on site. What's actually involved in doing that? Because I've heard about it a little bit, but not many organisations, to my knowledge, have somebody who's there to deal with that type of crisis.
Yeah, so mental health first aid has been around since the year 2000 and is it's an Australian-born concept, delivered in 25 countries across the world now, very, very credible, endorsed by the government. And mental health first aid teaches people not to diagnose or treat people or become counsellors, but actually to be aware of the signs and symptoms of poor mental health, and how to support someone in the workplace so that they get the right kind of support professionally, and in all other areas of their life. And we've actually now, in the last week, gone online, purely online, with our mental health first aid training. So it's a blended course where you do e-learning at your own pace, and then 2 short 2.5-hour sessions with myself over video conferencing to consolidate the skills, and then you'll be an accredited mental health first aider for 3 years.
Great. Okay, thank you. And I've got a question here for myself, I believe, from Michelle. With extra pressure being put on credit professionals, are you seeing an increase in them looking to move or staying put, or even an increase in roles for these type of positions? So to answer that, yes, we have. In fact, there was quite a flurry going back a few weeks ago in demand for credit professionals. And even yesterday, I was talking to a CFO who mentioned that the majority of his time was spent in credit. So they were fortunate their business was actually going quite well, and they were selling lots of their products, but he said credit is taking a lot of his time. So we've seen more so on an interim basis. There's been positions that have become available, but also want to mention for people who are in the credit roles that it would be, it's always a tough job, I think, but even more so at the moment, they're under a lot of pressure. Unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of permanent roles, a lot of options for people to maybe leave that environment, jump into another one, but it's definitely been an area that's had some activity happening. And another question for Tina. This is from Mark. It would be good to gain your views on the discussion with someone who potentially could be suffering from mental illness, as they may turn their listening to consulting and could make the matter worse for the employee. What would be your advice there?
Yeah, I hear this kind of thing a lot around if I approach someone, it is going to make them worse. If they're already suffering, not being compassionate is likely to add to the suffering, in my opinion. So, and I know it takes a lot of courage, and we're not expecting people to diagnose or treat, but if we can let people know that it is okay to experience a decline in our mental health when life is going poorly for us. If we try and put it on a parity with physical health, it helps people to understand. So if you saw somebody that was struggling with a broken ankle that they weren't getting treated by the doctor, and every day they came in and you noticed it was getting worse and worse and worse, and you just kept quiet about it and said nothing, it isn't something that people would do. They would say, "Hey, how are you doing? I can see that you look like you're in pain. You look like your ankle is sore. Have you spoken to a GP about that?" That's what we're trying to encourage people to do. Mental health and physical health approached on a parity in workplaces.
And I've got a question or two from Brendan, actually. The first one's for myself. How do you see the accounting prospects in the not-for-profit space? So the not-for-profit space has dramatically changed in just the last 2 years. So going back a step, maybe sort of 5 years ago, we were 70% mining services with our client base. That sort of fell away as mining softened going back a while ago, and then became more healthcare focused and not-for-profit in particular. And that's because of the amount of transformation. So there has been a real trend for the last couple of years for a number of roles to be created. And even so, more recently, that's just continued. It hasn't really stopped. So, and particularly in the environment they're in now, they continue to transform. So I think you'll see strong demand coming through for not-for-profits because their environment, the way that they operate, a lot of their operating models have been switched around completely, and therefore the skill sets they need have been switched around. So I don't see any sign of that dropping off just yet. Overall, obviously, demand has gone down, but I still think we'll see strong demand from the not-for-profit sector going forward. The other question from Brendan, how do you overcome quickly an anxiety attack in the workplace?
Oh, what a brilliant question. It's covered in mental health first aid as well. And it's actually a really quite easy response. So anxiety attacks, panic attacks are common. About 25% of the population will experience at least one in their lifetime. And the thing is that we feel as if we should do something to someone to help with an anxiety attack, when in fact what we should be doing is understanding how it affects us physiologically. So a panic attack will only last for around 10 minutes. And I know that people that experience frequent panic attacks will say mine lasts longer, but our bodies can't maintain that high level of arousal for a long period of time. After around 10 minutes, one of two things will happen. The person will either pass out, they'll lose consciousness, so that the body can then go and take a big breath in because we need the oxygen. So we will either pass out, or our body will naturally start to bring us back down the anxiety scale, where we're not in a position of panic. So the best way we can support another person if they're experiencing a panic attack is to ask them how they want to be supported. Sometimes they say, go away. Sometimes they say, hold my hand. Sometimes they say, I don't know. And then you think, oh my God, I've got to do something. You don't. You just need to be with the person, reassure them that they're safe, because hold in the back of your mind that this is going to pass after around 10 minutes.
Great, thank you. And a question from Joseph, I believe for myself. With the increased number of highly qualified candidates now on the market, will we see employers asking employees to reapply for their roles so that the employer can get the best person inside and outside the organisation? So I'd actually say no. I don't think if you're in a job, I don't think employers will be able to then advertise that job externally and see if they can get somebody better, because obviously you wouldn't be able to do that. But I do think that what we might see come out of this pandemic is that the skill sets might be a bit different. A number of organisations are looking at the roles that they've got at the moment, and then think, actually, as we come out of it, perhaps we need to change the way we operate. And if we are going to have a number of people working from home, maybe that means the role could be slightly different, or so on. So you might see that your job might change, and in which case that's quite a different story than just applying for the same job. And if that happens, you could see a different skill set being required. So, and you might look externally for that as well as internally if it's a different job. But for the same job, that I don't think we're going to see you just being replaced by someone else, because I don't think you could do that legally. The other question for Tina, this is from Michelle. Many people go into help mode and become drawn into someone's anxiety and can in turn end up feeling low because of this. How can people protect themselves and do the right thing?
Yeah, so it is difficult if we are looking or living with or caring for somebody that is experiencing high levels of anxiety. The self-care tips that I've already given, I would suggest that you actually ramp it up. And even more so, the paying attention to things you're telling yourself. So feelings are contagious. It is not unusual at all for, if we are around an anxious person, for us to feel anxious, and the same goes for somebody who is happy, and the same goes for somebody who is angry. So you need to pay attention to the things that you tell yourself, and whether this is this my anxiety, or is this the anxiety of another person that I've actually picked up? Breath is a very effective way of managing our own anxiety. And it is okay to be boundaried when you are living with or caring for somebody that's experiencing anxiety. And that might mean not indulging continuously in anxious conversations, but rather encouraging a break from the rumination, a break from the worry, go and take a walk, go and do something that you enjoy, or go and separate for a little while. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care for yourself too.
I've also got a few questions from Natasha and Christine, and I believe I'm correct in saying it's relating to essentially how do you deal with poor management issues that might be causing the anxiety and the stress. And there was a comment earlier, I believe, from Faye saying the only ways she managed to deal with was to actually leave that environment. But if you're still there and you've got poor management issues and it's causing these anxiety potentially and other factors, what should we do as an employee?
Yeah, so unfortunately, when it comes to mentally well workplaces, there are workplaces that do generate environments that are conducive to being mentally well. And then there are others that have environments that impact on our mental health and push us along the mental health continuum. Bullying and harassment is one of the top issues around mental health in workplaces that we certainly deal with in our work every day. So I guess there's two things. The first is whether you have tried what you feel is everything that you can do to resolve the situation, and you feel as if it's never going to be resolved, and this is just the way, the culture that the workplace is. And then maybe it is time to have a look around and see if there's something else. But I do know that is not as easy as it sounds. It could be that you might need, again, to speak to your employee assistance program. And I know I come back to that, but we provide employee assistance programs ourselves through the Career Development Centre. And we know about the businesses that we support. And we know how that they operate in terms of looking after their staff's mental health. So I would suggest that you speak to somebody in the employee assistance program as well. To be honest, it's very hard to fight a fight with something like this when you'll be depleted emotionally because you feel as if you've been emotionally battered around the head, and that's the way we tend to feel about that. So I would seek some advice from your employee assistance program, and remember that your people and culture or HR departments, they are there not only to protect the business, but for the people as well. So it may be worth just seeing if there's somebody in the people and culture department or the HR department that you could possibly trust and share a little bit of information with to test their trustworthiness, and then see if you might have a possible ally there too.
Great, thank you. And another question coming through, and apologies we don't get to all of these, but from Christine, moving forward after COVID-19, what is the time frame before the Brisbane market picks up? Well, looking into the future there, I think that I don't know obviously how long COVID is going to last, but I think once things do stabilise, my prediction is that it's going to take some time. I don't think it's going to be this dramatic rise that some people are predicting. I think the fact that people are just going back to the office and starting their days, as I said earlier, doesn't mean they're suddenly going to start hiring staff. So I think the time frame is going to be fairly lengthy. And if you look at some of the talk around even the international borders potentially being closed to the end of this year, it's going to be a long time even until we can say after COVID-19, and God forbid if we have an outbreak of some form again and we have to go back to that point. But I think people are going to be nervous for quite some time, and I think it's going to be a relatively slow recovery. Another question for you, Tina. Someone's mentioned, but I've recently been using the Headspace app. What other sources are available out there for people? And I believe this is around sort of managing your mental health.
Yeah, okay. So, and that was that from Michelle Kirkby. I saw Michelle.
I just want to publicly say thank you, Michelle, because Michelle actually recommended yourself, Tina, and I'm very, very thankful to you, Michelle, because it's been a fantastic introduction and knowing someone like yourself. But over to you with that question.
Yeah, so the Headspace app is excellent. There's also a new app that's out there called Smiling Minds that people are raving around at the moment. But I would recommend having a look at, there are websites around where you can check your mood. So Mood Gym is a very, very good resource that people can use. I would definitely look at Beyond Blue. I would definitely look at Sane Australia and the Black Dog Institute. They have interactive parts of the website where you can have chats with people, you can ask specific questions, and there are free resources there too.
Great. Thank you. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Now, if anyone's asked a question and it hasn't been responded to, I will ensure that get back to absolutely everybody who's asked a question with an answer, whether that's through Tina or myself. And I also want to thank you, Tina, for your presentation. That was excellent. Tina's contact details will be available, and I suggest you do contact with connect with Tina on the likes of LinkedIn and social as well. So thank you very much. That was excellent, and thank you everyone for joining us. As I said, if you've asked any questions and haven't got back, I'll make sure we get in touch and go from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.